Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation. For today, this is part of our KPI series. So for today, we are going to be talking about KPIs for pickers. I think last time we had one of the warehouse topics as well. So this is going to be interesting. Before we dig into the topic, we are going to start with everybody's intros. I am going to start with my intro. Sam Gupta, principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, I am going to move to Chris for his intro.
Thank you, Sam. Chris Gherardini, president and owner of Turnkey Technologies. We just started our 30th year as a Microsoft Dynamics practice, so it's a big deal. I know I'm old, not really. I started young, but anyway.
Short.
Glad to be here. It's all good. Thanks, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Kevin, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Kevin Lawton of The New Warehouse. We're a podcast all about warehouses, as you could guess from the name. And we do a lot of podcasts around warehousing. We do some video content as well. And we also do some fulfillment 3PL services on the e-commerce side through a micro fulfillment center based in Philadelphia.
That is super cool. And this is really your topic, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here. Abu,
that's a good pick.
I know it's going to be a good pick. Abu, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Thanks, Sam. Excited to be on the show again. My name's Abu. I'm founder and president at Penny. We are a Sage X3 partner based out of Calgary. We have lots of experience implementing ERP systems and distribution, food and beverage, manufacturing sector in general. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Abu. And if you're in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions and comments. We typically try to cover them during the show. If we run out of time, we'll make sure that you receive your answers. On that note, Chris, I'm going to start with you. And I think we are going to have the pick joke series today. Kevin has already started the trend, so I'm going to pick on you as usual. Okay, so pickers, right? I mean, we were discussing last time as well. I think we covered a little bit. I don't know if we did really detailed discussion in terms of the picker role. So today we are going to do the deep dive of the picker role. And I think this is where the whole discussion about dock to stock will probably focus on, I guess. I don't know, maybe you guys can tell me, what is the picker role? And if it differs across the industries and any KPIs. Chris, over to you.
Sure. And as I'm sitting here, we were joking before we started about you've got to have the data. And KPIs are all data driven. So, okay, and in our world, we're in the pickers. Now, we've talked about warehouse managers and inventory managers, but if we look at the pickers, and I think the first thing I'd say about the data is if you're a paper-based system, it's going to be interesting to capture data for KPIs. It's going to be a challenge, but you can do it. And so if you think about where you're at in your evolution, and it certainly as you're more advanced with WMS systems, you're going to have better access to capturing data and analyzing data, meaning in the world of, I've got 40 pickers and 1 million square feet. And if you're paper-based, you can't tell who's good and who's bad, can you? You don't know who's fast and slow and picking good stuff, bad stuff. I mean, you really, in a paper-based system, I think in the reaction time is probably the other part of that, is how quickly are you going to see the data, be able to adjust. So we take a step back and, I've got a customer example. They're big, 1 million plus square feet, and he's got 40 pickers and they're picking shoes. They better pick 10,000 or more pairs a day or you're not a good picker. So we go back to the analytics. What are they looking at on these guys? Well, performance, right? Is that volume? Is that number of picks, number of pairs of shoes? So we're doing pairs. So we're looking at pairs of shoes for these guys, and they're looking at, picks. I don't know if they've got a pedometer and they're looking at the square footage that they cover and looking at how much exercise they get, but certainly volume is going to be a factor. And we have an analytic for this individual that sits on top of his data, and they're using a mobile device. So everything is right. They get everything here. Go here, go do this, move this here, buy this, or receive this, put it away here, transfer it here. Everything comes to the handheld. So as they complete activities, they're capturing time. It knows when he clicked to finish it. We've got time. Again, we've got some geo-tracking things and so forth. So in that data world, we exposed picking performance by picker. So graphical, and you're looking at who's a winner, who's a loser. And so, now what do you do? So then you get your action items based on your data. And so with that one, if it's picking performance or volume in this guy's context, accuracy is a separate one. Okay. But again, we're looking at both of those metrics for these individuals. Oh, he's got great volume, but he's 40% accurate. Okay. He's not the best guy. So if we're only looking at volume, so now this is a combo metric I'm discussing here. But in this guy's world, shoes, 1 million square feet, people are all over. They're probably zoned to some degree. Maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, that's a great metric to start with. And it's performance and it's accuracy, because one without the other is, like I said, hey, he's 100% accurate. He only picks 3 things a day. Okay, that doesn't, right? Same metric. So I'll start there. I've got a whole list of them, but these guys will get mad if I keep going.
So, Chris, let me ask you this, okay? So you are talking about, looking into data, right? If you want to figure out who's the fastest picker, you simply need to watch their speed, how fast they are walking inside the warehouse, right? And you should be able to know how good they are at picking. No, you need data for that.
Yeah,
So
you need data.
You need data for that. Okay. And let's say if you have the warehouse, and obviously we have a lot of different warehouse facilities where they don't have any sort of barcoding, to be honest. Okay. And they are not getting any sort of data.
Right.
Obviously, they're surviving. There's no question about that. But they obviously don't understand how picking works. So what are they missing? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And so in a paper-based system, because you're right, what percentage, and one of these guys may know that, how many people are still paper-based? And we have a lot of people that are, and they're still remedial, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just size, it's volume, right? You can't scale with paper if you're going to be a big guy and have 1 million square feet. I think those are, but to your point, how do you capture and how do you start looking at your data? Again, it's paper-based. You can still have a method and a process, whereas, are we looking at returns? Returns may have a correlation to the accuracy. Where, okay, I figure out picking performance or picking accuracy as it comes back in the door. Okay, maybe that's an indirect way to capture that data, because you're reason coding things that are coming back. It's broken. Oh, shipped the wrong product. Had an A, they sent a B. Okay, that's who's on the order, as long as we know who's on the order and things like that. But that's one way to do paper-based. Same thing, volume. Again, we can get some basic analytics off of a paper-based system. How many orders did you fill? And if we go back to just total orders, counting the pieces of paper by picker. Okay, great. I'm going to score that. Maybe you got a manual or an Excel sheet, but you can tabulate that. And why is that important? We're going to look at his wages. Now we're going to take the guy's pay and divide it by how many orders did he pick? Okay, well, if I can get the line items, maybe that's even more helpful. Get that next level of performance and cost, right? So that's paper-based. We capture count. Maybe it's just orders. Maybe we're looking at lines. Like I said, accuracy. Maybe we're looking at returns as they come back in the door, and we're capturing those. And but I think as you get these actions, you have to figure out, what am I going to do? Am I going to retrain the guy? Am I going to fire the guy? Get somebody better? Is there a logistical problem in my building that's causing this? Do I heat map? So again, I'm still going to drive actions off of some of these things as you look at these people. Anyway.
So very interesting insights. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So Kevin, I'm coming to you. And I think I like the joke that Derek is making, right? I mean, see, he's saying I need data for my data's data. And sometimes, you could have too much data, but that might not have any meaning. And I am going to share a little bit of story from my perspective. And I was talking to one guy, and he was talking about how you have to have the physical processes, right? And I think you talk about that as well. And if you are simply going to digitize something that is not working physically, you are not going to get anything anyways, right? So he was talking about, he did the training for the guys on the floor, because even if you implement the processes and, system, but if people are not necessarily trained, then you are probably not going to get results. So in this particular case, what he did is, because it might be harder to train inside the warehouse, so they created a location called Pick Zero. I don't know whether you guys have seen anything of that nature. Because Pick Zero, in my I've never seen that before. I don't know if that is some sort of WMS concept in some of the advanced WMS systems. That's a very interesting. It's almost like a sandbox, from the development world to train the resources. So I don't know what you have seen, Kevin, in your experience related to this story. Anything else that you might be able to share about the KPIs for pickers?
To your point on the test environment and sandbox, and as you called it, And first off, I'll say shout out to Derek. How you doing? He's a good guy, so follow him if you get a chance. But yeah, I mean, I think I have seen test environments where you can train pickers on the functionality of the system, which I think is sometimes the biggest thing. So you're able to take them through all the different screens without having to do live orders and potentially impact or slow down real orders, and give them some test orders to work through and understand different scenarios if there's exceptions, which yes, there is exceptions, even though we believe everything should be perfect, right? But yeah, I mean, I have seen those different cases, and I think that works well. So when you bring in new people or introduce you to a new department, if they were working in a different department and now they're going to start picking, it's good to give them that system awareness and functionality first, so they get a feel for that and they understand how to navigate through those different screens. On the KPI standpoint, I mean, I definitely agree with Chris, and I think we were on the same page last week as well in terms of the data driving those KPIs and ensuring that that data is accurate. And I think for the picker especially, it's incredibly important to make sure that that data is accurate, because a lot of times their reviews and their performance metrics for whether they're going to qualify for a certain level of raise or pay increase is going to be based on their performance, which is going to be driven from those KPIs. And the last thing you want to tell somebody is they're going to get less of a raise because they're not picking as fast, and then when they ask you to see the data and explain it to them, you can't really do that because your data integrity maybe is not so strong, right? So it's not a good position to be in overall. So you definitely want to emphasize that data to drive the correct KPIs. But when we look at KPIs themselves specifically, what should we look at? And we should look at speed definitely of the pick, but we should look at it at different levels as well. And I think dependent on the type of picking you're doing, and you may have different types of picking within the same facilities, whether you have people that are picking for e-commerce or people which would be usually individual unit picks. So you want to look at a units per hour type of number, or by lines in some cases, or by cases, or maybe you have people that are picking pallets only, so you want to go by pallet. But you want to look at that metric and see what that is. But then even further down, you want to break it out to see, how long is it taking for certain processes within the picking process, right? How long does it take them to actually get the product? How long does it take from, one scan to the next scan? How long does it take to, now that they've picked, to drop that off in the shipping area or wherever they're going to do the drop off for whatever your process flow is. And I think it's really interesting and timely post I saw just I think it was yesterday or Tuesday maybe, from Aaron Rubin, actually, of Shapiro, founder of Shapiro. He posted that within the network they're seeing that one facility, I think it was taking 80 seconds per pick, and the other facility, both facilities picking same product, was taking, I think, something like 31 seconds or something like that. So it was kind of a great KPI to look and be able to drill into and see where those processes falling short, and how can we improve those processes, and what's the difference there? Is it a slotting issue? Is it a congestion issue, equipment issue, something like that, or labor issue potentially? And then I think you want to look at the quality and the accuracy of the pick. Certainly you want to make sure, that you're not having any mispicked product. Is the picker picking the wrong product? Are they picking product that's damaged instead of, doing the right process and reporting the damage, or delivering it to a damaged location, whatever your process might be. If you don't have a process for that, you should. Definitely, right. And then, is it the right quantity that they're picking? If they're supposed to pick 10, are they bringing 12 to the shipper, whatever the case may be. So you definitely want to measure that, and you want to have a check for that too. You don't want your customer to be the check for your quality, right? You don't want your customer to tell you that the order was wrong. You want to know the order was wrong before it leaves the door. So I think you in that sense, you want to have that check to make sure the quality internally is good. But then also when you look at a metric like customer complaints coming inbound, you also want to be able to tie that back to your pickers too, because when the customer is complaining that product came damaged, product came wrong quantity, product came incorrect product, there's going to be some tie back to the operation, whether it's going to be in a picker or whether it's going to be in a loader, or whether it's the transportation's fault or whether it's the shipper's fault. But you want to be able to tie that back to your picking department too, and see, how are they performing on the customer complaint range as well, because we're not going to catch 100% of everything before it leaves the door. And I think the other thing you want to check too, because picking, you want to drive that productivity continuously. You want to be measuring that downtime and seeing like why are certain pickers not active for a couple minutes or 10 minutes, like what's going on there. Is it a traffic issue? Is it just pickers hanging out? I've seen where pickers are on cherry pickers, order selectors, and they're way up, and so it looks like they're doing something up there, and they're not doing anything. They're just playing on their phone or something, and which is not good. So those are some of the KPIs I think you definitely want to check for pickers.
Yeah, and I think sending it to customers and letting them test is probably the cheapest way of testing, right? You don't have to hire any testers.
At first, it may seem like the cheapest way until you start to lose those customers, right?
Exactly. So I think we can take so many different layers, Kevin, on the follow-up question that I'm going to have for you. I actually wanted to ask some of the advanced questions, but I mean, I'm still curious about the whole testing. I don't know how you sort of implement that in the when you are starting out in the sort of the test zero process that you mentioned, that what you are going to have some sort of test orders. So let's say if you have the live warehouse, live system, I don't know, from the software perspective, you can have the test software, but how do you sort of create the test orders? How do you simulate that? Do you have any sort of insights for the listeners who might not know how to train their pickers?
Oh, how to simulate that? So, I mean, I guess it's dependent on the system you're using. I mean,
Yeah.
I've used systems where, there is a test environment, and as warehouse manager, we could easily switch over into the test environment, and we could ask IT to create some test orders for us to utilize, and then we could go through the entire process flow of that order, and depending on who we're training and what part of the process they would need to learn and train on, we would just tee up that process all the way until that point where they would take over. If you don't have a test environment in your system, and your system doesn't have that option, I think it's important on the training aspect that you're not throwing someone out there by themselves. No matter how simple you think it is, you definitely want to have somebody with them, probably one of your most experienced pickers or your lead for your picking department, depending on how you're structured. And you want to be able to walk them through those steps, because there's a lot of different variations for picking that you need to think about. There's certainly just the navigation of your warehouse. How are your locations laid out? Do you have certain type of products in a certain area? How is the slotting done? Even things like, how does your product packaged? What is the piece count in each case? Do you have 10 per every case of your product, or some is 6, some is 10, some is 8, some is 12? And if I'm gonna pick one, am I picking like one inner pack, or am I picking one individual unit? Am I picking one whole case? How does that work? And I think you need to be able to break that down. I think if you have a good system, it should tell you that. But uh, it's easier said than I think done, translating that, and you have a lot of variability there. So you want to make sure that you're getting some of that, I guess, what you could consider tribal knowledge as well in the picking area, understood and gone through in that way. I have seen where if you have a test environment and some facilities have separated actual areas just for training, where there is product there and you can do the scan and do everything, and it won't affect anything in your live environment, which I think is honestly the best way to go, because they get that physicality as well in the training aspect, instead of just, hey, let's read this SOP or standard work together, which they're tuned out after the first paragraph, right? So you want to make sure that you're making it interactive and having them understand and really touch too, to be able to understand how is this process working. And I always find the most useful training aspect in the warehouse, especially, is you help them to understand when they do something physically, how does that impact the system, right?
Yep.
Because you may be able to move some products anywhere you want physically, right? But if you're not matching that in the system, then what's the outcome of that? What's the negative outcome? What's the positive outcome? How does it impact the person that's coming behind you to the location? How does it impact the person that's now going to get that product from you, that's picking, right? Right. If you're picking something and you're leaving a bunch of trash in the box with it that you took from the location, now the shipper's got to deal with that trash, right? So the picker should be, taking that, dumping it off before, they drop it to the shipper. So I think you want to make sure that you have somebody kind of going through all the motions with them and help them understand the physical and the system side of it as well.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that.
Sure.
Abu, I'm coming over to you. So in your experience, what have you seen as far as the pickers go? Any sort of KPIs, that they should be watching for?
Well, I mean, Chris and Kevin, they took their time and they want to bring this. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I mean, probably cost per pick. I think that was not discussed before, right? So, um, you're picking items, cost per picking a certain kind of product category, right? So each product is different. Not every product will take the same time to get picked, right? You have to compare apples with apples. Um, so that would be one metric, to track. Is it costing you more? Is it costing you less? Ultimately, you streamline something and then you run into operations, then things starts to lag, or there may be other factors that play over there. I think one of the other factors, we've talked quite a lot about tracking different kind of factors, right? Order fulfillment rate, how many orders did you pick, how many SKUs did you pick, how many did you pack? But perhaps what we should also discuss is what to do with those metrics, right? So if if the cost is going up, then you have to analyze it. And other than cracking the whip and making the, go faster or buying a new robot, perhaps, you have to also look at the warehouse design, right? So, for example, where the product should be placed, for example, right? So if it's a frequently picked product and, if you have an older school warehouse where somebody has to go up and down physically to get product, then, you have to move the shelving around, the more frequently picked products come at the bottom compared to the less frequently picked products. Then you also have things like, what's the frequency of products? If you're picking a certain product A, what's the likelihood that you'll also be picking an order, a product B, C, or D along with that product, right? So the complementary products which always sell together, for example. So designing those aspects of the warehouse as well, so that that the time to move between the picking operation also reduces, right? So working on those optimization strategies to reduce the pick time, that will ultimately, help you improve all the KPIs that Kevin and Chris were talking about. Similarly, then how to do picking, right? You probably talk about wave picking and zone picking, right? So how to schedule that together, right? So a lot of time, I think it's easy to create metrics if you have some sort of reasonable system to track those metrics. But I think a lot of time also has to go into all this analyzing how can we improve this time period, right? How can we optimize this time period? How can we shift around the warehouse to optimize it? Why are the mistakes happening, for example, right? Sometimes even smaller things like making characters bigger on a screen or on a paper pick to scan the product, that also can also help sometimes. So again, we have to analyze how we can optimize those pick times and not just focus on the KPI, in my opinion. Um,
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for those insights. So we are going to touch on this question. I think this very interesting comment, and Abu, I would definitely love to hear your perspective. So here I'm going to read out first, and this is coming from Derek Harrison, DERRICKHARRISON is the last name. Follow him on LinkedIn. So he's asking, I have seen time and time again unknowingly operations contributing to MHE bad metrics simply because of bad user input physically. This is also true for hardware monitoring the system like PLCs that get false input and then make decisions based on that input and then ultimately feedback and create false metrics. So I'm pretty sure Kevin is going to have some insights on this one as well. So Abu, do you want to start first and then we'll probably take around?
Sure. I mean, if I, essentially what he's saying is, bad data entry into the ERP system or your scanning system, right? And how does that affect decision making? So it's a valid point, and Kevin was talking about it earlier, is to track those mistakes, right? So one is, you're tracking mistakes when the customer returns come in, but also if you have a large enough warehouse, your picking and your packing operations are going to be different, right? Your different people are going to be doing those. So it's basically measuring, how accurate it comes to when you're packing the product, right? So are products missing over there? You track the user on a user basis, which user has the most mistakes, and then tracking those KPIs, and then building a reward structure around it. So it's just one thing to identify it, but how do we motivate people to make fewer mistakes, right? And one of the best ways to do it is to build those annual reward structures or pay raises based around those metrics to help accurate data in the system and accurate picking.
Okay, amazing insights there. Kevin, do you have any inputs
Yeah, sure.
on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's inevitable that if you're relying on like a physical input of some data to drive a metric, which I think is what Derek is saying here, that you may end up with some false data in that sense. If you're looking at a situation like in the operation where there's no real data capture, I guess, within the system, and you're relying on somebody to populate that. I think actually one of the ones we touched on last week in the warehouse manager KPI with the safety, right? I think it was Chris maybe made the comment. It was like, it's hard to capture safety data within like an ERP or a system, right? So a lot of times you're relying on something like that to be input physically, right? You're relying on somebody to say like, oh, there was an incident, and let's input it and measure that KPI. And I think that's similar to what Derek's saying here. But anytime you're putting that in physically, you do run that risk of having the wrong data potentially to take action off of, and ultimately, what happens is somebody runs with that number, and now like you're way off on what you're doing, or as he's mentioning, even like your hardware is taking the wrong actions or running from basically a false input, and giving you a result that is not necessarily what you need, and you probably end up scratching your head trying to figure out what's going on when it's back to that actual physical input that's driven that kind of negative outcome or lack of improvement in a sense. So, I think it's really important to understand that at those points, I mean, I think it's necessary evil in a sense, where you're going to have points where there's things you want to measure that you're going to have to rely on somebody to capture that as a human versus a system. But you want to make sure that you're doing that solidly, and making sure that you're double checking and following up on the accuracy of that.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that. Chris, do you have any inputs on this question?
Yeah, so as a math geek, there's data normalization, right? So if we're manually collecting it and we're putting it somewhere electronically, right, throughout the highs and lows, so we start looking for the erroneous type of stuff, and that's one way to get a little bit closer mathematically to what we're trying to evaluate. I think that's it. Big random, what are those? And yes, you're going to have that, but and again, do you need the quality checker? You're right. Let's throw some more overhead into the warehouse. I mean, ROI and efficiency, you're right. We're trying to run, and I don't. One thing we don't talk about is taking picker cost and putting it back into the sales order and saying how much margin are we losing because of warehouse operations. But that, again, I get the accuracy thing, and if in a manual system, and again, not everybody's got a WMS, and they're not all scanning. So again, as you advance towards scanners, what's the scanner do? We talked about picking accuracy. The scanner can eliminate the picking accuracy problem, right? Because you're beep, beep. All right, green light, go, red light. I got the wrong product, right? So, I mean, it really is, as you get to that level where you start eliminating error possibilities through technology. And again, but the data capture, like I said, if you're still manual, and even I think those organizations are going to focus on specific metrics. They're not going to try, I need 18 metrics and KPIs. They're not going to try to collect that many data points because the owners are going to know. We know instinctively. If you run an operation like, all right, I know there's a problem over there. Let's get some data and figure it out. And then whether they continue to collect the data, right? I think, again, it's like variances on a P&L. If I've got macro variances that are now, I got to get down here and start collecting data at the MO level. And once I find the problem, guess what? I'm managing by exception, not by rule. And I think even warehouse operations and pickers, we're looking for the same things. We're looking for the guy. There's somebody in there that's probably not performing. Let's figure out who it is. And sometimes macro statistics are going to get us there. Sometimes we got to go micro, right? So, but hey, in test environments, you're absolutely right. You can't go in and really get somebody trained up. And so in our world, okay, right? Dev environments, test environments, you're right. Not everybody's have them, Kevin, but we connect scanners to a different environment. Again, yeah, there's an isolated place with a handful of products. Practice and labeling, scanning, receiving, transfer orders, quality. Again, how to start, complete, use the handheld, validate user settings. You got the right menus. That all happens in an offline environment before you throw them into the big warehouse, because you're correct. There is no way to practice in a live environment without corrupting data or creating false data. And you're right, don't do it. Separation is imperative there, but that we all agree that, as we look at some of the metrics where they're slow or their cost is high, let's go back to training, right? And how good is the training and how effective are they? And even retraining. Oh, it's been a year. Guess what? Software upgraded. There's new features. So even if you think about organizationally things to improve accuracy, again, retraining. So we talk about it. The test environment, if you can't get one, again, I would ask a question, right, Kevin? I guess I don't sell the standalone WMSs. I know in our world we can have a couple scanners connected or one or whatever it takes. But anyway, and yeah, the outcomes. We talked about high cost. I saw another one on my list, just partial orders. You're going back to, okay, what's the action if the guy's always incomplete picking? That's another interesting one, isn't it? Is it his fault? Could be. Is it stocking? Is it reorder points? So there's one, as you see that partial picks, because now you got shipping costs. So now we have more shipping costs. It's not just picker. I'm picking 2 orders. I'm shipping twice, packaging twice. So that impacts cost a lot as well, the partial orders. And I know you guys talked about, Abu, you said warehouse efficiency. Yeah. How do you take the data and feed it where you get a heat map? There's services that'll come in to do that. So it's, again, we go by exception. Can we address a problem and then we're done? I don't need that KPI anymore, meaning I don't need a heat map all the time on my warehouse. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to take my data that really rationalizes, and again, sales history, I've got line items, products, I've got a picking location. Someone could feed that into a system and say, take a look. You reorder the warehouse. You're done. Do you do it once a year? But again, that's another great idea where that's a less frequent KPI that I would suggest, but it can impact picking performance. Your guys could be faster. Your cost per order pick could go down. Anyway, just a couple examples of all the time KPI. I do it once a year. I don't know. Anyway, just some ideas.
Okay, so amazing insights here. So I'm going to have one question, and then we are going to follow up with this comment as well from Derek. So one question, Chris, for you, and this is coming from your comment related to this whole variance thing, from the warehouse to your costing, and that always
Right.
gets interesting, right? I mean,
It
when you
does.
have really sharp finance guys, I mean, they always want this to be one-to-one, and we have seen scenarios where it's never one-to-one, and that's always a pain in general. Now, if you talk to any of the retail distribution guys, in general, the way they like to think, I mean, they always are trying to increase the warehouse efficiency, and we are going to take a round for this question. We'll take everybody's opinion in terms of what their perspective is in terms of the design. So from the warehouse perspective, you are sort of trying to create this offline experience, because if you are going to be talking to your ERP for each transaction and making the live connection, then you are probably slowing down your warehouse, which most distribution executives and the warehouse consultants, they just don't like it. Okay, so they are going to make it offline experience, either intraday, day. I don't know what how that is going to be, but they are typically doing a batch load, and typically that increases the number of variances that you are going to get in your backend processes, and that is a huge challenge. So that is number one question. And number two, I'm going to read this comment as well. So Chris, you can attack that. So this one is, for example, you have the system monitoring for gems. However, a PE is monitoring a place where operators work frequently and either lean or leave their trash or jackets in the area. It becomes a frequent gem instance. Now you have metrics showing this system overall has a ton of gems. Could be an issue of SOP, work space design, or programming in some instance. So number one, Chris, variance, and number two, gem issue.
Sure,
Chris,
sure. So on the variance, I mean, I live in a world where we're connected WMS, so we're not in a disconnected model. So it is real time, and and to that point, and I think that's the offline. But we go back to variances, and again, we go back to costing, and we go back to how do we cost a warehouse into the cost of products.
Yeah.
If we're not doing standard costing where we have an overhead percent, because that's the overhead percent on standard costing is your warehouse cost to carry the products and so forth, whether that's square footage. And again, do you add an overhead as you think about the sales orders? But we talk about variance. Is it costing variance? And I is it pick variance? I don't think it's pick variance. I mean, I don't think we're looking at that from that perspective. So were you talking about a costing variance? Is that where you were going with variance?
I mean, anytime, whenever you are going to have the batch load, you are going to have some sort of variance.
Yeah,
so you are trying to sort of create that disconnect in the process.
In your batch load, you're talking about bulk integrations between a WMS and an ERP system.
Exactly.
Is what I'm hearing. I don't live in that world, so I can't necessarily speak to that. But as you look at what Derek is pointing out, is if you look at the visibility or the granularity and where orders are in statuses, sure. Can I light up and see that, hey, I'm backing up on this particular area? So if you're thinking about jams in terms of workflow and business process, right? Pickers, packers, where do we have a bottleneck? Is that, for example? But yeah, I mean, if your system, again, we're collecting data real time on completion and transactions. I know where these things are. It's picked, it's packed, it's sealed, it's labeled. I don't know. Again, what are the levels of granularity we're looking at in warehouse operations by zone? So again, but those metrics could be available, but is it, we go back to work procedures and space and people leaving jackets and trash. Okay, now we got some cameras going on in there, and I don't know what their answer is, but if that's impacting picker performance, is just poor work environment. Is that what I'm really understanding his question, Sam? Is it just that? Jams?
I think he's referring to like conveyor jams.
Conveyor jams.
Yeah,
okay.
That's
interesting. So they're physically screwing up the equipment through contamination, effectively, whether it's be trash or clothing or etc.
Basically, and it's sending back false data that the conveyor essentially is jamming multiple times, which would lead you to believe that it's an equipment issue. But I think what he's saying is it's not always like a equipment issue. You're getting essentially
I get it. You got operators that don't deserve to have their jobs, and so like I said, the cameras thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how you fix that problem otherwise. That when you get a failure on a piece of equipment or a jam, pull up the timeline and look at, okay, was there something going on physically in the space of that? And I don't know. I mean, I'm a business owner. Yes, if I can attach to a cause of a malfunction and it's human, there's an adjustment in personnel made, right? I mean, is it a training problem? I don't know. I mean, I guess based on the comments on that,
more trash cans.
More trash cans. That's a great idea, and a coat hanger.
Yeah,
Right.
coat hanger, or put them in the
You're exactly right. Space
cooler or the
design.
freezer so they don't have to
Great
take their
point.
jacket
Space
off.
design. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
guys,
don't,
I think
I don't live in that world. So,
I think this is a very similar issue as finding hair in your food in a restaurant. So how do you fix that? I don't know. Don't ask me that.
Well, how big is the hair?
go to a different restaurant.
This is a great question, by the way.
That's funny.
Kevin, variance issue, and I have had real challenges. Okay, retail executives, very, very seasoned, distribution executives. Chris is claiming that I don't live in this world. He is always making real-time connection. I probably need to get some coaching from Chris on sales skills, to be honest. Okay, because I have never been successful so far in selling to retail and distribution executives. Who have never seen a live connection from WMS to ERP, and there is always a similar issue exists in the POS world as well. To be honest, it's very rare that you are going to have a live connection even today. That's why we have all of this, omni-channel.
So ahead, just Chris, to be clear, Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations has warehouse management embedded into the system. It's not an external system, so that's probably the landscape that's different. There's a lot of bolt-ons, but please continue.
Yeah, I get it, and it's a I don't know whether it is more of a preference issue, taste issue. I get Chris, but I mean, I think this is more of a design thing that I have had challenges, especially when you talk to seasoned executives. With them, they always like to decouple the process, and obviously they get the efficiency, and they just don't see why this connection should be live. So in your experience, typically when you talk to anybody in the, let's say, distribution or warehouse industry, do you see people leaning more towards the batch connection or the live connection? Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I've seen and what the preference would it always be a live connection? I mean, I think what it comes down to ultimately is just having real-time visibility into your inventory. I think that's the biggest thing that stands out, right? I mean, it's are you going to be able to know, especially if you're doing e-commerce, omni-channel type of stuff? I mean, how are you going to know you have enough to fulfill orders for the day if your orders are coming from one system feeding in, and you want to have that real time be able to fulfill that order in the same day? Then you're going to have a struggle if you're doing batch, I think. But having that real time visibility certainly allows you to move faster, and I think potentially disappoint less customers, because you're not going to be potentially promising product that's already been sold or moved or something has happened to it on the warehouse side. So I think more and more what we see from like a WMS perspective is we want the real-time visibility as going forward. I think that's the best way to go. And I mean, tying it back into the KPIs as well. I mean, you want real-time visibility into your KPIs too, because a lot of times you see like a lag in getting that data and extracting it and then putting it together to be able to know how you're performing. And it's like you're not knowing maybe until the end of the week, how did you perform on Monday? And because something bad was happening on Monday, it's now happened for 4 days throughout the week because you didn't really know until Friday because the data wasn't available, right, or something like that. So yeah, I mean I think real time is the way to go. I mean, I don't think in 2023 we should be real time, right? Why live in the past? We want to know what's happening now.
Yeah, so very interesting perspective, Kevin. Thank you so much. So Abu, I'm coming over to you, and since we are talking about KPIs and we are talking about big KPIs overall from the system design, system performance perspective, and I get their perspective as well, why they push for the batch scenario. Because if you look at the real, transactional performance, when you are going to hit ERP in the real time, ERP is trying to hit 200 different tables, trying to compute cost, trying to get the inventory, whatever it is trying to do. Obviously, the length of the transaction is going to be far more, the depth is going to be far more. So the total travel time, especially in the high volume scenario, real time may not make sense. Okay, and that's why they sort of like to decouple, because they are shortening the transaction, warehouse is moving fast, and then after that they are reconciling, which obviously creates variance, right? So that is the whole rationale for creating this batch, even though you can pretty much do everything online and everything real time right now in 2023, but you are decoupling to manage your capacity, to manage the transactions. So Abu, I don't know what you are seeing in your space. Do you have any commentary by any chance on this one?
Yeah, so I'm assuming you're meaning, like the ERP and the financial system integrated with the WMS, right? So with the warehouse transactions, right?
So in this particular case, yeah, this will be decoupled. So they are probably using a standalone, and they are purposely using a standalone. Even if they are using embedded one, they probably want to use it decoupled.
Yeah, I mean, we have come across a lot of cases where they're running decoupled systems and they want to integrate, and also happens vice versa, that they're running an integrated system and they want to decouple. So the biggest thing is, I'm not sure when you said transaction speed. I don't know if that's the issue or not. I'm not sure what you exactly mean by it, but the biggest issue is controls, right? When you have an integrated system where everything's runtime, where the financial data like where the inventory has to be in position, where the PO has to be created, approved by the accounting department, slows things down, right? So it adds controls, it adds processes to it, right? So it slows the warehouse down, but if, but if you decouple it, they can do everything a lot faster because there's no accounting control on each step in each process, right?
Yep.
So there are advantages and disadvantages to both, right? So your warehouse goes faster. They are generally happier if they have nothing to do with accounting, right? But as the company grows, what I've seen is, when accounting controls become important, when you're a public company, when you have to do that daily reporting on financial, or when you have to do daily reporting on your loans that you have taken to the bank, then it becomes really cumbersome for the accounting people, right? So they are generally the drivers for an integrated system because they can make reports faster at the end of the day. They can make inventory carrying decisions faster. Purchase orders can be cut in a more appropriate way. So the inventory valuation is much easier to do, right? You do not have to. Those standalone systems are generally really bad at valuing your inventory, right? Because the financial data is not there to make those valuation decisions. So that's the where the push and the pull factor is. Accounting, they generally want integrated so that they can have easier time reporting, and the ops people, they want it decoupled so that they can run faster. The decision ultimately comes down to size. I think as you grow bigger, you either have an army to maintain the data synchronization, right? That's one option, right? If you're or you go for an integrated system, right? So it's I think it's an individual decision. I would tend to lean towards an integrated system, especially for medium-sized businesses, because you cannot have an army of accountants and reconciliation experts looking at the data and your costs going up that way. But if you're an Amazon, perhaps things can be done differently, right?
Yeah. So and do you have a comment, Chris? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think as we go back to variances, and I think to the decoupled. So the problem, because I've integrated decoupled systems, I just don't sell them today. But the point is, it's the inventory quantities, not just on hand, but allocated. Some of those delicate ones, where because the reservations and the communication with the warehouse on reservationing, and not right inventory doesn't lose the allocations, and I think those are so critical, and that's real sensitive data. On hand batch, it was 100, now it's 20. Okay, what you shipped out, that's primitive, but I think it's that low level stuff where the synchronization, to Abu's point, that gets out of sync and you got big problems, and reconciling that kind of stuff. That's it. I think that was the comment I'd make about where the integration really can get. But I can get the big, right? $billion companies, right? And like I said, so I understand.
Yeah, so there are some, and Abu, I'm going to have one follow-up for you, and I think that's going to be the clarification on the question that you have asked. And you are absolutely right. The point that you are trying to make, related to the accounting, that's what I meant by the length of transaction and the time that it is going to take to process the transaction, because you are actually hitting the GL entries and doing all that things from the accounting perspective. So obviously it's going to take longer depending upon how your bandwidth is in general inside the warehouse. If you have like 1 million feet warehouse, I don't know how big that is going to be, but sometimes you might have Wi-Fi issues, and doing all of that on real-time connection could be a challenge as well, to be honest. Okay, so that's number one issue. Number two issue is going to be overall with respect to the the way they like to think, I guess, the size comment that you had mentioned, right? So when you are dealing at the enterprise level, it's a very, 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 very different problem. Okay. So all of these executives, they have worked at Kohl's, Walmart, and they have seen whatever, in those places. So there you have to decouple the transactions. And the reason why you have to decouple the transactions, because you are probably making 1 million hits per second. I don't know, sometimes it could be as much as that, right? So the load is so much that your integrated systems are probably going to break, and that's why you are sort of trying to manage the capacity, in the individual system. But then they come to mid-market and they are saying, what, it's always decoupled. So that could be a very interesting argument. So I don't know if you're going to have any sort of follow-up commentary there.
I would assume, like in today's like cloud systems and transactions and efficient databases, I don't know if that would be like SAP. I know runs an integrated system, right? And it has a fairly like fairly large companies also use it for inventory management as well, warehouse operations. So I think the issue is, for example, a purchase order comes in, right? And the accounting says if it exceeds X, if the product that you're receiving exceeds a certain percentage, we want to stop the process, right? We want an approval process. Somebody has to approve it, and then so on, right? So those are the sort of things that the accounting don't like, right? So if it's Walmart, and I'm assuming you have 1,000 errors a day or something, right? And everything has to go into sequence to accounting to approve something. That slows things down, right? So it is from that perspective, like another thing that comes up is inventory adjustment, for example, right? Accounting wants control. Operations want, oh, I don't see it, I just want to make an adjustment, right? Then we'll let the accounting figure it out later. So it's those sort of things and issues which tie back to accounting, which I feel is the bigger issue, like which operations want to avoid so that they can move and run faster. I mean, I personally, I don't have experience working in like a warehouse as big as Walmart or Costco, so I don't know if I can comment on that, but that's my personal experience, at least in the mid to upper sector, is why people want to decouple it from
Yeah.
the.
And honestly speaking, in my experience, I think that is always going to be power struggle in the way compensation are structured. To be honest, okay, when you are going to grow bigger, operations do not really care what accounting does, okay? They have no interest in that, because they are not paid for that. So it's a very interesting conversation there. It's always power struggle in politics. Right, thank you so much.
Right, I mean, the more control you have, the more work you have to do, right? The fewer control, then you don't have to, you can move faster, make a lot of more mistakes, but somebody down the line has to worry about them, right? It's not you. So
exactly, could not agree more. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. So Chris, I think we have 6 minutes. I was thinking that maybe we'll finish early today, but doesn't seem like. So we have 6 minutes. So if you want to do comments or closing commentary, whatever.
Hey, kid systems create real good accountability, actually, because the downhill thing doesn't, anyway, I'm being funny about that, but I could see the advantages of that. But metrics, again, what's it about? It's about becoming more profitable as a business, having amazing customer service, right? And so if you think about, okay, what drives customer service? Okay, employee satisfaction. I'm sorry, everybody, don't forget about the workers either. But it really is, you look at, and the incentives for the workers, that's how we help them. The customers, they get a great experience, right? Their product ships, it's accurate, it's packaged neat, nobody's extra stuff's in there. But then the financial performance, we've got to be profitable, and we've got to be able to have metrics from last year to this year and say, hey, we're running our warehouse operations more efficiently. We trimmed it. Do we need 7 people? We probably can do it with 6 if we do the math, right? And those are the types of decisions that we make, and we impact the P&L substantially by knocking $60,000 salary off or whatever warehouse guy might get. But that's the real world we're in. And again, even organizationally, crawl, walk, run. This isn't about 20 KPIs. It's about which one's the most important to you. And again, we talked about customer service. We talked about profitability, worker experience, right? Everybody focus on those and see, okay, how do you make them? How do you move it? How do you move the needle, right? And you got to measure. Are we making progress? That's it. I think those are the simple examples that I would continue to remind people about organizational. In politics and big, that's why I said I don't sell into those guys. I'm like, sorry, Chris G, it's okay. They can talk to me, but I don't want those deals. But it's good. It's nice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Kevin, any comments, closing advice, please?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, with the KPIs on pickers, I think it's very, if if you have a picking issue where you're not getting your products fulfilled and picked on time and accurately, I think oftentimes I think Abu kind of said earlier, you go out there and crack the whip, right, to get them going faster. I think it's not always, if you have good KPIs, you're able to tell whether it is a actual picker human issue, or do you have an issue with your process? And I think that's really what it comes down to. And I think, if you're digesting those KPIs and looking at the data accurately and drilling down into them, then you're able to see that there's trends spread out, and you're able to investigate before you go out there and crack the whip and dishearten one of your good pickers, and now they don't want to pick at all. So you kind of have that double-edged sword there, and you want to make sure that before you go after the human, you're drilling down into those KPIs and really understanding, is my process solid, that I shouldn't be having any issues at all with that. So I think that's what I would say is the last takeaway for me.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that. Abu, any comments or closing advice, please?
Sure. I mean, I'll just focus on, how to develop the KPIs. I mean, engage different stakeholders and develop KPIs which everybody has a buy-in in. If people don't buy into the KPIs, you'll never get the results you need, right? And then monitor and, analyze how you can improve them, and then do some goal setting, right? You cannot go from bronze to gold in, 1 month or 2 months. Do those stepwise tightening of the KPIs and then monitor it that way.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. So that's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another topic. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight.
See you guys.
Thank you.